So how exactly do you spend your time when you know exactly how little of it you have left? It's a pretty profound question, right? Well, in today's Explainer, we're breaking down how one of the world's most successful and honestly most demanding innovators navigated his own mortality to build his ultimate legacy. We're looking at the final years of Apple co-founder Steve Jobs. Now, this isn't just another story about a tech giant. It's actually a deeply human look at how a master architect of the future faced the end of his own.
Okay, let's dive into this. You might remember his famous 2005 commencement speech at Stanford University. Jobs told the graduating class that for 33 years, he looked in the mirror every single morning and asked himself this exact question. If today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer was no for too many days in a row, he knew he had to change something. He viewed death not as this terrible tragedy to just be ignored, but as, in his own words, life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. For Jobs, this wasn't just some abstract philosophical concept. It was a very real, looming presence that forces all of us to ask ourselves if we're truly spending our time on what matters most.
To really understand this, we need to map out his medical journey because it completely shaped his final decade. Back in 2003, Jobs was diagnosed with cancer, but it wasn't the highly aggressive, rapidly fatal pancreatic adenocarcinoma we usually hear about. He actually had a really rare form called a gastroenteropancreatic neuroendocrine tumor, or GEP-NET. It's a much slower-growing tumor. The following year, in 2004, he underwent surgery, and as his battle continued, fast forward to 2009, he had to take a leave of absence to receive a liver transplant. He expressed incredible, deep gratitude for his donor, a person in their mid-20s who tragically died in a car crash.
Now, what's absolutely crucial to understand about this period is the sheer amount of medical uncertainty he was facing. You often hear debates about his initial decision to explore alternative therapies for 9 months, things like a strict vegan diet, acupuncture, and botanical remedies, before he finally opted for conventional surgery. But to really grasp his mindset, we have to look at the context neutrally. Because his specific GEP-NET cancer was just so incredibly rare, there was actually a very slim evidence base and really limited clinical trial data available. And that was true for both the conventional treatments, like specific chemotherapy agents, and the alternative therapies he looked into. Like so many patients facing a terrifying medical unknown, he simply had to make a call based on the best information he had at that exact moment.
Let's jump forward a bit and see how all of this builds into his professional endgame. By August 24, 2011, Jobs knew his time was drawing short, so he formally stepped down as the CEO of Apple. But true to his nature, he definitely didn't leave things to chance. He secured the company's future by executing their succession plan, officially recommending Tim Cook to take over. In his resignation letter, he wrote with absolute conviction, "I believe Apple's brightest and most innovative days are ahead of it." He was stepping back, sure, but he was making absolutely certain the machine he built was primed to keep running. It's a pretty profound lesson in building something that thrives long after you're gone.
And that brings us to a really fascinating piece of trivia. What do you think Steve Jobs actually did on his very last day as Apple CEO? You might picture this solemn, tearful goodbye or some dramatic packing up of his desk. But no, not at all. On his literal last day, he chaired a board meeting. Then, he spent time playfully trying to fool a pre-release, totally top-secret version of the virtual assistant Siri by throwing various questions at it. After that, he simply rode home with Apple attorney George Riley. That evening, he told his biographer Walter Isaacson, "I've had a very lucky career, a very lucky life. I've done all that I can do."
But listen, he hadn't just been focused on software and succession during those final months. He was also working on a massive physical legacy. We're talking about a staggering estimated construction cost of $5 billion. He spent his last working months personally, and I mean meticulously, overseeing his final architectural project. He was designing a brand new home for his company, a place that would outlive him and completely embody his absolute commitment to design and function. I think this really shows us how thinking about our legacy isn't just about the words we say, but the enduring structures, whether literal or metaphorical, that we leave behind for other people to build upon.
And this brilliantly illustrates the jaw-dropping scale of what that $5 billion actually achieved. Apple Park. We are talking about a single, massive circular building, affectionately known as the Ring, with a 1.6-kilometer circumference. It houses 12,000 employees under one continuous roof of curved glass, spanning 2.8 million square feet. And beyond just looking cool, it treats sustainability as absolutely central, not just some cosmetic afterthought. The whole place runs on 100% renewable energy, powered by 17 megawatts of rooftop solar. The grounds feature 9,000 trees, many of them native to California, and it houses the spectacular 1,000-seat Steve Jobs Theater, which is an underground auditorium topped with this crazy carbon fiber floating roof. It is widely considered one of the finest examples of 21st century corporate architecture.
But let's shift our focus from the monumental scale of Apple Park to something much more deeply personal. At his memorial service at Stanford University, his biological sister, the novelist Mona Simpson, delivered a profoundly touching eulogy. She didn't speak about the tech icon or the billionaire. She spoke about the brother she met in her 20s. She reflected on his life, his long illness, and his passing, sharing this incredibly beautiful observation. She said that, in the end, death didn't happen to Steve. He achieved it. It was the ultimate reflection of a man who put intense, conscious effort and love into absolutely everything he did.
So the really crucial point here is that underneath that famously demanding, sometimes harsh exterior was a surprisingly tender soul. In her eulogy, Mona Simpson actually noted that he was like a girl in the amount of time he spent talking about love. Love was literally his supreme virtue. She recalled the very day he first met his wife, Lorene. He came to Mona and practically gushed, saying, "There's this beautiful woman and she's really smart and she has this dog and I'm going to marry her." And you know what? He did. They shared 20 years of marriage and raised 3 children together.
Those same children and his wife Lorene were right by his side in his hospital room on October 5, 2011. As he grew weaker, he spent his final hours simply looking at his family, taking them in. And then he looked past them. According to his sister's eulogy, his final moments were entirely peaceful. Right before passing away, his final words, the very last things he ever said, were simply, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow."
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly powerful thought. During an internal Apple meeting years before his death, Jobs was asked about company culture. He answered that the absolute best way people can express their appreciation to the rest of humanity is to make something wonderful and put it out there. You might never even meet the people who use it, but through the care and the love you put into making it, something translates. Steve Jobs certainly put his wonderful things out there. He built his legacy. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this question to reflect on. What wonderful thing will you make with your limited time?